The morning I turned 62, I woke before the streetlights gave up their last pools of amber on the asphalt. The house was quiet in the stubborn way old houses get when they are used to one voice that has gone missing. Outside the back window, the maple trees along the alley were dark shapes against a pale Boston sky. I rested my hands on the wood and felt the faint ridge where a nail once lifted the grain, and I did not sand it flat. I built Hale construction with hands like these. In the early 80s, I poured concrete behind supermarkets and hauled rebar in the snow with a foreman who measured you by whether you showed up when the air burned your lungs. I learned to read plans by tracing them with a pencil until the roofs and lintels seemed to rise up from the paper. Before long, we moved from driveways and storefronts to libraries and schools, then hospitals, then the kind of projects that make a skyline feel like a heartbeat. Hale Construction was never the biggest firm in Massachusetts, but if I told a mayor we would have steel up by August, the crane arrived by July. By 2015, I knew it was time to sell. I told myself I wanted to slow down, to stop wearing a hard hat at dawn and a suit at 3 in the afternoon. Truth is, I saw what the next decade of work would take out of me. There is a math to aging. You can feel in your knuckles when the weather turns. A national company made an offer that would let me put down the weight I had carried for 30 years. $75 million. When the final wire hit, I sat in my truck in a parking garage and listened to the engine idle while the number settled in my bones. I did not know the smell of that much money. Caroline would have laughed at that thought. She believed money was a tool, not a cent. We met in a diner outside Worcester when I was a young man, with a belt looped through a tape measure, and she was studying menus the way she studied people. When she died in 2019, the house changed temperature. Our son Daniel was born in 1993 and arrived with 2 fists and a cry that sounded like a promise he intended to keep. He grew into a kid who liked charts and schedules and the certainty of a calendar. Harvard Business School called to him like an invitation written in gold leaf. I paid the tuition without blinking, because that is what fathers do when they can. I told myself that confidence was a good thing, because the world does not hand it out for free. Our daughter Emily was born in 1998. She arrived quiet, eyes wide, absorbing everything. She calls me every Sunday and asks if I am eating well. When Daniel married ambition, I supplied the furniture. I bought him a Tesla after his MBA because he talked about sustainability and the importance of setting an example. I helped with the down payment on a townhouse in Cambridge when the bank turned the numbers into a knotted rope he could not quite climb. I helped again when a promotion at the fund came with a promise that did not quite match the check. That fall, after Carolyn died, the house taught me its night noises. I would sit at the kitchen table with a legal pad and try to list what still needed doing. Somewhere on the list, a smaller line kept slipping in. Talk to Daniel. The words looked simple. The talks we had felt less so. He spoke of performance and positioning and the truth of markets. I spoke of crews and sight lines and the truth of weather. One afternoon, I drove out to Cape Cod and parked at the dune path we used to walk when the kids were small enough to ride on my shoulders, and Caroline would warn me that the sun would get the back of my neck. I stood on the boardwalk. In the glove box of the truck was a manila folder that had followed me for years. I closed the box and left the folder where it was. I was not ready to read it again. Not yet. Daniel dropped by once that winter and stood in the doorway with snow melting on his coat. He told me the fund was tightening and the work was serious, and he was the kind of person they counted on when other people hesitated. He said he had a plan for the future, and he wanted to take a leadership role in the Hale legacy. I told him there was time to talk about those things. He looked at the kitchen clock and then at me as if I had said we had time to understand gravity. Emily came the next day. She asked if I had taken a walk and if I had spoken with her brother. She listened the way her mother listened. You could feel the gears of her attention line up with the teeth of your words. On her way out, she paused at the doorway and said that some people show love by fixing things, and some people show love by asking you to prove yourself. On a night in March, when the wind shoved at the windows, I walked down to the basement and opened an old metal cabinet that used to hold drill bits and now held envelopes. I ran my fingers along their edges and thought about the cost of what I had built and the cost of what I had given. I took out a thin packet and set it on the workbench. I read the first paragraph and then the second. I put the packet away before the third. I told myself the day would come when I would need every line of it. I told myself that day was not today. Trucks clatter differently on wet streets. I found that I was walking more and driving less. Sometimes I would end up by the river and think of the times Caroline and I sat on a bench and watched crews row long boats through a dawn fog. She once said that marriage is crew and not speedboats. You win by pulling together and not by gunning the motor. I hear that sentence on mornings when the house is too quiet. I hear it on nights when my phone lights up with a message that is all schedule and no hello. There are parts of my life I have never said aloud. I have done that with many things. I will not do it with this. There is a truth folded into my life like a map tucked under old receipts. It has been there for years, and it has edges that do not soften with time. I have kept it safe because some truths are not meant to be shared until the ground under your feet begins to tilt. The day is not far. When it arrives, the map will unfold, and when it does, the lines on it will change everything that comes next. He started without hello. He said the fund was shifting into a new phase and they needed leaders who understood velocity. He said construction wisdom was fine in its day, then he paused and told me I was outdated. He said that was exactly what he meant. The old world, the old way, the old timetable. He had a meeting and he had to go. Emily called while I was there. She said she had a half day of training and could stop by if I wanted company. She told me her students were building dioramas, and one boy wanted to make a tiny construction site with cranes that moved. She said he asked her how many men it takes to raise a wall without a lift, and she had guessed and guessed wrong and wished she could call me from the classroom. 2 days later, Daniel asked me to meet him near his office. He said there was a window to rebrand the Hale name, and he wanted to take it. He said investors respond to narrative, and if I wanted legacy to mean anything, then it needed momentum. I told him the name Hale had been affixed to steel because we showed up and did the job. He smiled in a way that meant he disagreed without wanting a fight. He said authenticity was useful if it served growth. Then he told me again that I was from another time. Call Maggie. I drew a box around that last line and underlined it. The next day, I drove to South Boston and found my sister in a booth at a diner where the coffee comes thick and the blinds are always a little crooked. Maggie had been a lawyer for 30 years and retired with the habit of reading every room like a contract. I told her about Daniel and the word he had chosen and the way he was pulling toward the Morgan orbit. She told me to keep the trust exactly as it was. She told me not to add a CEO trustee and not to allow any power of appointment that could be exercised without me sitting in the chair. She told me to keep original documents in the safe deposit box and copies at home and a second set with her. She reminded me that a fair plan can turn unfair when people feel entitled to outcomes. A week later, Emily invited us both for dinner. He grinned at her and told her she was sweet and sentimental, and that was why the world would push past her if she did not adjust. She told him she was not about to adjust her definition of family. Daniel checked his phone and said he had to go. He kissed his sister on the head and clapped my shoulder and left with a wave through the glass. I washed dishes with Emily and told her that her brother was under pressure to prove something. She said pressure does not turn a person into a stranger unless the person wants a new face. I knew what she meant. I told her I was. Spring pushed toward summer, and the calls from Daniel grew shorter. A colleague sent a link to an article about a fundraiser where Olivia spoke about community impact, and there was Daniel in the background, a fixed smile, a hand on her shoulder. Emily forwarded a picture someone had posted from that private dining room, and there was Daniel with a napkin folded just so his face turned toward Howard, as if the older man were giving him oxygen. I went to see Maggie again, and we walked along the harbor in a wind that blew the smell of salt into every sentence. Then she said we needed to be ready for the moment when a favor would come dressed as a compromise. She said it might be a suggestion to streamline accounts or rename assets for optics, or to put my signature below a stack of papers for the good of unity. She said I would want to say yes to keep peace and that the right answer would be no. I told her I understood. She said she believed me and squeezed my arm and told me she would be there when the moment arrived. On a Sunday afternoon in June, I drove to Cambridge and parked 2 streets over from the townhouse where I had helped cover the down payment. I rang the bell and waited. No one answered. I wrote a note for Daniel that said his mother used to leave a vase of flowers on the steps, just because she liked the look of bright color against brick, and that I would bring by a small plant next week if he had room near a window. I did not leave the note. It felt like a message from a time he had already folded and put away. That evening, Emily came by with mail that had been dropped on her porch by mistake. She held it up and asked if I had seen one yet. It was an invitation to a gallery event hosted by the Morgans. It listed names as if they were ornaments on a tree. At the bottom, in neat script, was Daniel and Olivia. I turned the card over in my hands and felt the weight of the paper. Emily watched me and asked if I wanted to go. I told her I was not on the list. She said lists can be wrong. I set the card back on the table and thanked her for bringing the mail. She hugged me and said she would call in the morning. Later, I stood at the back door and looked out at the yard. The porch light burned steady because Emily had set it right. Somewhere a car door shut and a dog barked and stopped. I told myself that families drift and return if the dock is solid. I told myself that the tide can carry a boat into a new harbor when the rope goes slack. I put the safe key back on its hook and closed the closet door. The house settled into the night with the soft sounds I knew, and I listened for a while and then I let the quiet take the rest. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday that smelled like rain before the clouds had made up their minds. It sat on the welcome mat like a stranger waiting to be invited inside. My name in a tidy hand that knew how to keep ink from wandering. I picked it up and felt the weight before I broke the flap. The card inside carried a gold border and a crest for a hotel I knew too well. 4 Seasons, Boston. The text announced an engagement celebration for Daniel Hale and Olivia Morgan, with a list of hosts that began with the Morgans, and then a committee of names I had seen in society pages and nowhere else. My own appeared at the bottom of the page in a smaller font, as if the printer had remembered me at the last moment. Mr. Richard Hale was invited. No father, no family designation, just a guest among many. There was a website in small print for replies, and a suggestion for black tie optional that read more like black tie expected. I set the card on the kitchen table and ran a thumb along the border until a flake of foil caught under my nail. Emily arrived not long after with a stack of graded papers and the kind of concern she tries to tuck behind a smile. She saw the card before I could cover it. She read quickly and then looked at me in that when she is both daughter and witness. She said she was happy Daniel had finally put a date to something, and then her face changed. She tapped the line with my name and said she was worried. She said she feared they would try to make me small. She did not say the word humiliate. She did not have to. I poured coffee and we took our mugs to the back steps. Emily said I did not owe anyone my presence if the invitation treated me like a seat filler. She said I could take the high road by staying home. I told her there is another version of the high road. The one where you stand where you belong and let people sort themselves. She asked if I was sure. I said I had been unsure plenty of times in my life, but not today. She called later from her apartment to ask if I wanted company for tuxedo shopping. I told her I had a suit. It was worn at weddings where the couples believed, and at funerals where belief had to be invented on the spot. I pulled it from the garment bag and held it up by the shoulders and the fabric draped like it remembered. I set the suit across the bed and lined up a white shirt and the tie that Caroline bought me the week Daniel graduated. I pressed the shirt with a steam iron and smoothed each sleeve. In the closet, a shoebox held the polished Oxfords I keep for days that ask for a little ceremony. The card lay open on the dresser. I read it again and noticed the order of names. Olivia first, then her parents Howard and Patricia, then a row of co-hosts. No mention of the Hales beyond my single line, and Daniel's name nestled under hers. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the old ache in my knee and then the older ache in a place you cannot point to. I closed my eyes and found Caroline where she always waits near the kitchen sink in morning light. Do not let anyone decide your size for you. Stand where you stand. That was how she put it. I carried that line back to the bedroom and folded it into the inside pocket of the jacket. When Emily stopped by the next day, she brought a small box with silver cufflinks in the shape of tiny knots. I said they were perfect and meant it. She held the suit sleeve while I threaded one link and then the other. She asked if I wanted her to come to the hotel. I told her this was something I needed to do on my own. She nodded. In the afternoon, I called the front desk at the hotel and confirmed the start time and the ballroom. I thanked her and wrote the details on a note card and set it beside my wallet. I checked the safe in the closet and found the envelope where it always waits. I did not take it out. The morning of the event came hot and bright and full of tourists who had decided Boston's sidewalks were a theme park. I took a long walk along the river. Back home, I showered and shaved and let the mirror tell me the truth. A face that had seen weather. I tied the tie slowly and had to start over once when the knot slid into the wrong angle. I did not swear. I do not swear when a task is mine to fix. I slid my arms into the sleeves and settled the fabric across my shoulders. I slipped the invitation into the breast pocket. I took the cufflinks out and ran my thumb across the tiny knots. I pocketed them and then went back to the dresser for the watch Caroline gave me on our 25th anniversary. The leather band had softened to the shape of my wrist. I stood in the hallway and looked at framed photographs I had not paused in front of for months. Daniel on a soccer field with grass stains on both knees. Emily on a school stage in a paper crown tilted over one eyebrow. Caroline with her hair pulled back on the beach, laughing into a wind that wanted to steal the sound. I put a hand on the wall and let the paint be cool under my palm. Traffic near Boylston Street did what it always does, and I left the truck in a garage. I took the elevator to the lobby level and stepped out into marble and glass. The air held the polite chill of hotel conditioning. I walked to a mirror near the concierge desk and checked the line of my tie. In the reflection, I saw an older man. An attendant asked if I needed directions. I told him the ballroom, and he pointed with an open hand. I thanked him and stood for a moment longer than needed. I turned and headed down the corridor. At the door to the ballroom, a young woman with a tablet asked for my name. I gave it and watched her scroll. She smiled and said, "We are glad you could join us, Mr. Hale." I thanked her and slipped it into my pocket. I stood at the threshold. For a breath, I saw Caroline's hand on my sleeve and heard the sentence I had carried into the lining. A hostess with a calm smile checked the card in my hand and walked me along the edge of the crowd. Mine waited between a gentleman with a cuff that flashed a watch the size of a biscuit and a woman whose perfume announced a preference for confidence. The gentleman beside me introduced himself as an advisor who specialized in things that rise when you want them to and fall when someone else is watching. He asked what I did. I told him I had built buildings and then retired. He said Daniel stood near the screen with Olivia and a knot of guests. I told him that pride and concern are old neighbors. Daniel had the posture of a person who has learned where cameras live. Olivia shone the way some people do when a room has already agreed to like them. Howard Morgan shook hands with a force that measured the distance between the first grip and the next deal. A server offered me champagne. I like to know my balance when a floor shifts. A woman across the table asked if I was from the Hale side or the Morgan side. I told her I was Daniel's father. She said the hosts had done a marvelous job and that Olivia's parents were pillars. A bell-like tone cut through the music, and the quartet paused on a chord that settled without complaint. He introduced himself as the MC and welcomed the guests with a series of thank yous that sounded like line items being checked off with care. He invited a partner from the firm where Daniel worked to speak. The partner told a clean story about Daniel solving a problem under pressure and added a line about leadership that the room accepted as fact. After him came a friend of Olivia, who described her as light in human form and brave in heels. I watched Daniel and tried to see the boy who once woke me at dawn to show me a Lego tower that needed more sky. It is not easy to find a child inside a man when his jaw is set for winning. I ate it because I was taught not to send back food at a celebration. The gentleman with the large watch asked if I had seen the private dining room upstairs, where legacy donors were thanked. I told him I had not. Howard took the stage next and spoke as a man pleased with his reflection in a window. He called the evening a union of families and a charted course. He praised Olivia's dedication and Daniel's vision. He welcomed the Hale name as if opening a gate that already belonged to him. She looked toward the back for a moment, and her eyes skimmed past table 18 like a stone touching water. I thought of Emily and her ladder and the small way a light can change a room. I thought of Caroline and what she would have done with a microphone and an unfair moment. She would have smiled first to make the blow land softer, and then she would have named what was happening in a sentence no one could refuse. I told myself a father has a right to bless a milestone. I told myself a man who built a life does not need permission to speak a simple truth. When the MC returned to the mic to cue the next segment, I rose. The chair legs whispered against the carpet. I walked along the wall to the aisle and felt the air change as conversations paused to let a man pass who had decided to be seen. Up close, the stage felt higher than it had from my seat. I reached the foot of the small stairs and waited for a break between thanks and the next anecdote. I told him quietly that I would like 1 minute. I told him I was the father and wanted to offer a blessing and maybe a story that would not take long. He nodded in a way that was more pause than yes. He glanced at the tablet. He leaned closer so that our voices did not disturb the applause for a florist. He said the speaking schedule was complete for the evening. He said there was a plan for remarks, and we were at time. His tone was kind in the way a gate can be kind while it closes. He thanked me for understanding. He stepped back up to the mic with the practiced ease of someone who knows how to keep water flowing around a rock. For a second, I stood where I was and felt the familiar weight of decision settle into my shoulders. A few people at nearby tables watched with a curiosity that was not unkind. I nodded to the MC not because I agreed, but because there are moments when the wiser move is not a step, but a measure. I walked back along the aisle. The quartet picked up a gentle tune. A server moved aside for me with a dip of the head. I reached table 18 and sat down. The gentleman with the watch asked if I had found the restroom and smiled without waiting for an answer. The woman with the confident perfume complimented the flowers again. A new course arrived, a piece of fish that flaked when I asked it to. I ate it because my mother taught me that strength can look like good manners. On the stage, a montage of photographs began. Childhoods and vacations and meetings that had allowed themselves to be photographed. Daniel at a college event, with a ribbon pinned to his lapel. Olivia as a teen at a piano. The room softened during the pictures the way rooms do when a screen gives people permission to remember. I lifted my water and let the cool sit in my mouth. My eyes went to the far corner where the doors opened toward the kitchen, then to the far wall where the champagne tower waited for the first glass to be pulled. There is a shape to patience, and I have lived inside it. I placed my glass beside the plate and folded my napkin across my knee. The music eased into a song people knew without needing to be told its name. I kept my seat and waited for the next turn in the evening. Daniel reached the microphone, and the room shifted its weight toward him. He told the room about the markets he understood and the plays he had called when other people hesitated. Then he steered the story to the family name and announced that he was the natural successor to the Hale legacy, the one prepared to carry Hale construction forward by reimagining it for a smarter era. He did not use the word father. He narrated a past that sounded like a runway for his future. It was a story well told, and that was the part that burned most. A good story can make a crowd forget who poured the footing under the stage. The MC thanked Daniel and invited Howard up. He said Daniel would be the pillar of two families, strength with foresight, decisiveness with grace. He spoke of the Hale name as an asset that had waited for the right hands, and of the Morgan name as the network that would lift it into the air it deserved. The draft from the service doors touched the back of my neck. Someone at our table broke the quiet that had settled over my corner and leaned toward me with a courteous half-smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He asked what I did these days. Retired came out too soft to be called an answer. I added that I still consulted sometimes, which was true enough, and that I kept up with crews I had worked with for years. He said it must be nice to relax and enjoy the fruits. Patricia turned in her chair so that her shoulder angled toward me. She said I should be proud that my son had stepped into the space I left. I felt heat climb my neck and cool again before it reached my face. I lifted my glass and took a measured sip, as if hydration were the task at hand. On stage, the MC moved the program along with a toast from a colleague who called Daniel a closer and a leader, someone who thrived where pressure lived. The ballroom accepted every version. I sat inside a quiet that tightened like a belt and listened to the room agree with itself. I said, perhaps. I said there were places I had never walked with Caroline, and that there were maps we had folded and never unfolded. A server lowered a plate in front of me, a tender fish laid over a pale sauce. I cut a bite and tasted nothing. The MC returned and thanked sponsors and planners and anyone who had arranged moments to happen on time. He invited all parents and hosts to stand for a bow. Eyes searched for anyone from the Hale side and did not find much, because the Hale side had been placed at a polite distance near a set of doors that let the staff breathe. Do not let them measure you. Do not let them teach you your own height. Sit. Breathe. Remember. The montage on the screen shifted into photographs of Daniel and Olivia together. Vacations with bright water. Charity events with clever lighting. Then a shot of Daniel as a boy in a hard hat standing beside a backhoe, his hand on the steel like a pledge. Laughter and fond sounds rose from the room. The boy in the picture was not old. The hat was too big. My hand tightened around the stem of the water glass until a small ache climbed my wrist. A man from another table drifted past and paused at my shoulder, as if he had been sent to tidy a loose end. He asked again what kept me busy now. The question had sharpened. It arrived with the force of a script that expected only one line in response. I said I kept houses standing in my memory. It was not a joke. She did not look at me when she said it. She looked at the people who would agree. Howard added a line about vision that turns into value. I considered telling her that beginnings often sit on top of endings and call themselves by a new name. I did not speak. The room warmed with the second wave of toasts. People stood with bubbly glasses and told stories that had been cleaned for public use. An aunt recalled a childhood prank that did not sound like a prank. A colleague spoke of late nights at the office turning into early wins. My chair felt at once too small and too heavy. The MC announced that it was time to open the floor for casual remarks from the couple's closest circle. He scanned a list on his tablet and called 3 names I did not know. The microphone moved through the front tables like a candle at a vigil. When it passed to the next hand, I saw the opening I had hoped for and rose halfway before the MC glanced in my direction and then away. My knees bent again, and I sat. The message was gentle and unmistakable. Your seat is your place. The sound reached me a second late, thinner, like music heard through a wall. I set my napkin on the table and folded the edge once to keep my hands from clenching. The humiliation did not arrive in a single blow. It came in 100 small permissions granted to everyone but me. It came in the ease with which a son erased a father, and a room agreed to misremember who hammered the first nail. I let my breath settle into the count that got me through storms on half-finished roofs. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth. The quartet slipped back into their corner melody. The draft from the doors found me again and cooled the back of my neck. I did not wipe it away. I let it mark the moment for what it was. The MC thanked everyone for their words and promised dessert soon. The champagne tower waited for its first glass to be pulled. The crowd adjusted chairs and conversations rose again in a swell that felt like weather. At table 18, a quiet settled that was almost kind. No one needed to say anything else. The room had already said it for them. I sat without moving hands, still eyes steady, and let the humiliation complete its slow circuit of the ballroom. When it finished and the laughter climbed again toward the stage, I placed my napkin across my knee and waited for the air to change. I saw Emily at the far edge of the dance floor, jaw tight, eyes hot. She reached the front row where the Morgans held court and lifted a hand as if to ask for the floor. Daniel stepped to her before she could speak. I could not hear the words, but I knew the tone. Emily looked past his shoulder to find me. She mouthed a single word that I did not need help to read. Enough. Emily remained near the front, anchored by her brother's hand on her arm. Patricia leaned in to Emily. Emily's lips moved once more, and then she went still, a choice that in her means not surrender, but storing power. Maggie slid into the empty chair beside me with a grace that comes from half a lifetime of walking into tense rooms after being summoned by a single shaky phone call. She looked at the stage, then at Daniel, then at Emily, then at the door where staff moved like a tide. She said it was time. She said she had seen this scene in enough versions to know the end if we let the room write it. She asked if I had the resolve to stand when standing would invite every eye and every judgment. I told her resolve is not the problem. She angled her head toward the service doors. I followed the line of her gaze and found a familiar figure just inside the threshold. Tall, neat tie set perfectly, eyes scanning for the next move. David saw us and started across the back of the room in a quiet diagonal that kept him between tables and shadows. I stood to meet him. He said he was sorry for the spectacle and that the world finds efficient ways to test a man when too many witnesses are present. He said he brought something and that I should put it away until I needed it, and I would know the hour because the room would tell me. He reached inside his jacket and drew out a document envelope thick and flat and sealed with the kind of tape that prefers a knife. He placed it into my hands. I asked if everything inside matched the last set. David nodded and said the trust instruments were current as of last month, and the notarized certifications were attached. He had included a concise summary that even a hostile listener could not misread. He had also drafted a short statement of intent in my voice to be read aloud if I chose. Maggie listened and then asked if he had considered the social dynamics of the room. David said he knew ballrooms as well as courtrooms. He said we would want to speak once cleanly and only after the program declared itself finished. Howard stepped forward to confer with him, and then returned to his place satisfied that the evening would proceed in the order he preferred. I watched Emily try once more to break the circle and saw Daniel tighten his grip lips, moving in a string of reassurances. The band shifted from waltz to something modern with a beat you feel in your ribs. David tilted his head toward a side lounge beyond a set of palm plants, where the hotel had tucked 2 leather chairs and a table for conversations that were not on the agenda. We moved there not secret, not announced, simply absent from the flow. Maggie took the nearer chair and I took the other. David remained standing, a habit from depositions that keeps the energy going where he wants it, not where the furniture wants it. He asked if I wished to preview the statement he had drafted. I said no. I knew my story and my rights, and the law can walk beside them without holding their hand. He outlined the sequence he proposed, sentences learned from years of fixing other people's disasters. When the MC declared the formal remarks concluded, we would move to the front aisle but not the center. We would request the microphone as a courtesy, not a demand. If refused, we would stand and speak anyway, projecting to the back wall with the kind of steady voice that embarrasses a sound system into doing its job. The statement would be under 2 minutes. It would declare the structure of the trust, the authority of the trustee, the status of the Cape House and other assets, and the absence of any designation naming Daniel as beneficiary or successor while I lived. We would reference the presence of counsel and a retired attorney if anyone doubted the plain meaning of English. Then we would be silent. He said the silence after a fact can do more work than a paragraph. Maggie reached for my hand and held it the way you hold a wire for a man balanced on a ladder. She said that I did not need to explain the past to the room or make anyone feel better about the choice I made with Caroline. She said to keep it clean. She said to say only what the paper says and let the echoes argue among themselves. I breathed and felt the steadiness return like muscle memory after winter. We returned to table 18 with the envelope under my jacket. The edges pressed a faint line against my ribs. The band slipped into a standard. The MC thanked the donors again and hinted at dessert. The champagne tower waited for the first glass to slide free. Staff stood ready with napkins for the small flood that would follow. Emily broke the circle at last. She came down the aisle toward me, shoulders square, tears not falling but present. She reached my chair and leaned close. She said she could not watch them erase me and asked what I wanted her to do. I told her she had already done the most important thing by standing where she believed a daughter should stand. I told her to stay close but not interfere when I rose. She nodded and glanced at the envelope as if she could see through the jacket. Daniel followed her at a distance of 6 steps. He slowed as if space itself had thickened. He smiled a smile built for photographs and said this evening was not the moment for debates. He said he loved us both and wanted peace. He said there were plans in motion and that everyone would have their time. Emily kept her eyes on me and not on him. I told him he should enjoy the praise being given to him while it still belonged to him. His face flickered, then settled. David reappeared at my shoulder and asked in the tone of a man confirming a departure time whether I was ready. Maggie, back at my other side, said the same with a squeeze of the arm. I felt the envelope again and counted my heartbeats until they matched the slow measure of the band. I stood. A few heads turned. Not many. The MC raised the microphone for what sounded like the final thank you. Then he announced that the formal remarks were complete and that dessert would be served. A cheer went up that was more relief than delight. David breathed yes in a whisper no one else could hear. I stepped into the aisle and started forward with the calm of a man walking a beam he has crossed 1,000 times. The distance between table 18 and the edge of the dance floor is not long. It felt like the exact length required to set a spine. Near the front, I felt a hand brush my sleeve. Emily had moved with me, not in front of me, not behind. She stayed at my side like a shadow that knows where the light is. Daniel stood by the stage watching. Olivia touched his arm, uncertain for the first time all night. Howard fixed his smile in place. Patricia lifted her chin. David held up a palm to the MC and asked for a moment in a tone that brokers use when a trade is already done. The MC hesitated, tablet in hand, a schedule ending, and something unscheduled beginning. I felt the weight of the envelope once more, then slid it into my palm. I did not open it yet. I let it rest there, a quiet thing, with edges sharp enough to draw a line in the air. The room breathed in. The lights held steady. I lifted my eyes to the crowd and waited for the sound to fall enough that a single voice could stand without raising itself. My hand rested on the envelope, and the weight of it pulled me backward through time, not away from the ballroom, but down through the years to a day in 2015 when the ink of a wire transfer was still drying and the smell of new carpet in a law office tried to pass for fresh air. After the sale closed, I drove around the block twice because I did not know how to walk into a future that large. That afternoon, I met Maggie at David Cross and Associates on the 12th floor of a building with brass in the lobby and security that learned your name fast. He said the sale proceeds and the remaining interests needed a home that would not wobble when the years did. He said a revocable trust would let me steer while I was alive, and a schedule of beneficiaries would keep the road clear when I was not. He said we could ring-fence the Cape House, the portfolio, the insurance, the residuals from consulting, if I chose to keep a hand in. I told them about Daniel, how he was brilliant and hungry, and as sure of himself as a man leaning into a wind, he believes he can outwalk. I told them he was the first to raise his hand for any advantage, and the last to consider whether patience might be a better word than victory. I told them I loved him, and that love is not a reason to hand over the keys to a truck he had not learned to drive. He said the trust could be drafted with me as the sole trustee, and that no transfer or distribution could occur without my hand on the pen. He said we could name future conditions to be considered after I was gone, but that none of them would operate while my heart still worked. We took a break, and I stepped into the hallway. Maggie joined me and touched my elbow. She asked if I wanted tea or water. I said I wanted to stop time for a minute. David placed a slim envelope on top of the drafts, my name in Caroline's hand. I slid a finger under the flap and eased out a single page in the careful script she used for notes that were meant to last. She wrote that love and stewardship were not the same job, and that I had always known the difference. She wrote that our son would do great things if he learned to lift without taking, and that he would not learn that lesson if the floor under him never moved. She wrote that when the time came to choose, I should choose the slower truth over the quick praise. She wrote that she trusted me to protect what we built, so that it could protect who we loved. Keep the matches dry. Then I folded it along the creases it suggested and slid it back into its envelope. I asked David to make a copy for the file and to keep the original with the documents that would live in a safe that did not live in our house. We signed the drafts that day and then came back 2 weeks later for the final documents. The trust bore my name and the title of trustee under it. Hale Construction, sale proceeds. Brokerage accounts. The Cape Cod property on a street that smells like salt and pine. Insurance proceeds designated to the trust by separate instrument. I initialed where David pointed and signed where the law required. When it was done, David leaned back and let the chair creak once. He said the structure would keep its shape even if seasons did not. He said I could amend while I lived, but that no one else could drive nails into it without me. Maggie touched my wrist and said Caroline would approve of the corners. I carried the binder home that night, the way you carry a newborn down a hospital hallway. I set it on the dining table and stared at it, and half expected it to move. Then I placed it in the safe and closed the door and put the key back where my hand could find it in the dark. Years have a way of testing the quiet decisions. Daniel thrived on speed. He changed apartments, jobs, friends, and talked about momentum as if it were a virtue all on its own. I helped him when help felt like teaching. I resisted when help felt like handing over the steering wheel in a storm. He did not like the difference, and I did not expect him to. Emily grew into herself with a grace that does not ask for attention. When Caroline died, I took the binder out and put it on the table again, and read the letter and the schedules and the pages that say what a man has put in place because grief can fog even a mind that has learned to work in weather. Twice in those years, David and I updated the inventory. Once for the sale of a parcel of land I had held, because I liked the feel of ownership under my feet. Once for the acquisition of a small stake in a company started by an old foreman's daughter. Each time I slept better. Back in the ballroom, the envelope in my hand felt like the handle of a tool chosen for a job you can no longer postpone. I could hear David behind me, a quiet anchor, and Maggie at my side. Across the room, Daniel stood beside Olivia and smiled at a compliment someone had aimed at his future. Howard watched the room with a hunter's stillness. Patricia made small talk that felt like thread woven into a net. The letter from Caroline sat in my head as clear as if she had just written it. Keep the matches dry. I understood in that exact second what she had meant in every line. The trust was not a threat. It was a shelter. It was not a weapon to punish a son. It was a boundary that kept a family from losing its shape to a storm of appetite. I felt the old engine in my chest settle into a patient idle. I loosened my fingers and then tightened them again around the envelope. I knew that I would not need to raise my voice. I would need to speak simply and then let the paper do the work for which it had been prepared. I looked again toward the stage where the MC hovered near the microphone tablet, balanced like a small shield. I pictured the conference room in 2015, and the way the documents had laid themselves out like a blueprint. I pictured Caroline at the kitchen sink, the letter drying beside the dish rack, her hand warm on my back when she told me to be the man I had trained myself to be. My mind lined these images up until they clicked into place like boards locking tongue into groove. The trust had been built for this hour. I did not know that then, but I knew it now. I drew a slow breath, the kind that carries a word from the lungs into a room with weight, but no strain. My thumb found the edge of the tape and pressed. The seal did not break yet. It did not need to. Sometimes a truth announces itself before the envelope opens. I let the thickness of the paper rest against my palm and allowed the knowledge to finish its work in me. The thing we had signed a decade ago was not just a set of pages. It was the shape of my intention given the force to stand up in public. And if a man is lucky, that is enough. Dessert plates had not yet landed when Daniel drifted back to the stage, as if pulled by a current he had set in motion. The MC lifted the microphone to make another tidy thank you, and Daniel placed a hand on it with the gentle pressure of someone accustomed to getting what he needs. He thanked the guests for their generosity, spoke of gratitude, then shifted in that smooth way he has when he is about to claim new ground. He told the room that the Hale name would move into its next chapter under his guidance. He said he would inherit the entire Hale estate and bring it into alignment with a smarter, more modern strategy. Howard began to clap before the rest of the room caught up. I set my napkin aside and stood. I walked toward the stage along the outer aisle because habits learned on job sites do not leave you. Maggie watched. I told him I would like the microphone for a brief statement as Daniel's father. He said the program was complete. He thanked me for understanding. I looked past him to the room. Daniel stood close enough to hear, but far enough to pretend he had not. Howard's smile thinned around the edges. I did not raise my voice. I told the room I needed 1 minute. You learn in construction that sometimes the person who speaks last does not need volume. The pause stretched. The MC placed the microphone in it, because to refuse would have been louder than to comply. The weight of the mic was nothing compared to the envelope under my jacket. I drew the envelope out and rested it against my palm. To my left, I felt Emily, the heat of her anger banked now into something clearer. Maggie stood where I could see her if I turned my head. I began with thanks. Not the list of sponsors and florists the room had already swallowed, but a simple acknowledgement of the people who had come to witness a promise. I told them a father has 2 jobs at moments like this. I said a line had just crossed the room that needed to be set straight. Daniel shifted his weight and set his jaw. Howard's arms folded. Patricia checked the faces around her to see which way the air was moving. I kept my eyes on the middle distance where a voice belongs when it serves more than one person. I spoke about the year 2015. I said that after 3 decades of building, I sold my firm and sat with counsel to protect what my work had made. I told them I created a trust and that I serve as its trustee. I said the assets often discussed as if they were already someone else's, the Cape House, the accounts, the instruments tied to the sale, are held in that structure and are governed by documents that are not subject to applause. A murmur ran under the chandeliers and then faded. Daniel lifted a hand in a half-wave meant to settle the crowd. Howard began to clap again, as if another wave of approval might drown the complication. Patricia said something to a woman in the front row, and they both nodded the way people nod when they like the ending of a story they have not heard yet. Olivia's eyes held mine for a second, measuring. I did not return the microphone. I said the statement just made about inheriting the Hale estate while I am alive was incorrect. The word incorrect landed well. I lifted the envelope so that those closest could see what it was. I did not brandish it. I said, I have here certified copies of the key pages, including the trustee designation and a current certification of trust. I said my counsel was in the room if anyone wished to confirm what the words mean. I let that hang for a breath, and then I added that the truth needed to be spoken so that love could share the room with clarity. Olivia's smile slipped a half-inch. Howard's folded arms tightened. Patricia's lips pressed thin. Daniel took a step toward me, then stopped. The MC looked first relieved and then alarmed. He asked if I would like a podium. I said no. I broke the seal with my thumb and eased out the summary David had prepared. The paper made a small sound that somehow reached the tables near the front. I scanned the lines not because I did not know them by heart, but because a room like this expects a man to consult a page. It is a way of telling them that what follows is not opinion, it is record. My voice stayed even. I said Richard Hale, trustee of the Hale Family Trust, created and funded in 2015, amended thereafter, holds full authority over disposition and management of the trust property. I said no beneficiary or successor has any right to control or claim those assets during my life. I said the Cape property is titled to the trust and not available for leverage or representation by anyone but me. I said distributions are at the sole discretion of the trustee. I said this is the structure my late wife and I chose after careful thought. I made sure the words late wife were a balm and not a blade. The room softened and then held. A man in the second row started to applaud and then thought better of it. Emily's breath steadied at my side. David shifted his stance not forward, not back, only in readiness. Maggie's hands were clasped at her waist, the way she stands when a judge is about to rule. Howard tried to laugh, a short sound shaped like disbelief. Patricia began to speak to the person beside her again. Daniel turned toward the crowd and began a sentence about family vision. I did not interrupt him. He stopped after 5 words. When it became clear, the air had changed allegiance. Olivia drew her hand away from his sleeve and folded both hands together as if she were cold. I raised the page slightly and let my gaze move across the room, not as if I were searching for permission, but as if I had already found it and was simply placing it where it belonged. I told them this was not a fight. It was a fact. I said we could dance and eat cake and wish each other well, and later we could talk like people who prefer truth to rumors. I said I would not take long. Then I lowered the page and let the silence serve as the period my words required. At the edge of the stage, the MC looked for an instruction that did not exist on his tablet. The band leader watched my mouth and waited for a cue that would not come from him. I felt the room reduce the way a sauce comes to itself over slow heat. A father spoke. A claim was corrected. A boundary stood. I folded the summary once and slid it back into the envelope without closing it. I kept the microphone because the next breaths still belonged to me. The crowd leaned in a fraction, the collective posture of people who suspect the room is about to turn on its axis. I let my eyes find Daniel and hold there with a calm that did not accuse. Then I looked over his shoulder at the faces that had been invited to witness a promise and gave them mine. I said that I remain the controlling trustee of the Hale Family Trust and that it holds the proceeds from the sale of my company along with every related account and instrument. I said every item people have been discussing, as if it already belonged to someone else, is governed by this trust and managed by me while I am alive. Some guests looked at me, then at Daniel, as if their eyes could arbitrate ownership. David stepped to the front edge of the aisle without touching the stage. He said the documents are lawful and current, executed and notarized, and that certifications are on file with the court. He named the trust and the date and said there are certified copies here if anyone requires them. She said she is a retired attorney and sister to the trustee. and that under the terms in place, Daniel has no rights to inherit control or represent trust assets during his father's life. She said there is no power of appointment vested in him, no authority by implication or assumption, and no standing to present himself as successor. Her tone did not accuse. The MC, Olivia, Howard, Patricia, Daniel. The room's tension shifted. I said I have watched my son work hard, and I respect ambition that learns to carry others and not only itself. I said what was just claimed about inheriting the Hale estate while I am alive is not true. Howard began to clap as if to call the room back to the version he preferred. I told the guests there is one more thing I needed to share because facts live better with context. I said that the trust was built with my late wife's counsel. Carolyn wrote to me in her own hand when we were finalizing this structure. She told me that love and stewardship are different tasks, and that I have always known the difference. She warned that our son would do great things if he learned to lift without taking, and that he would not learn if the ground under him never moved. She told me to choose a slower truth over a quick praise. She wrote that she trusted me to protect what we built, so that it could protect who we loved. Keep the matches dry. I stopped and folded the letter along the crease that had learned its work long ago. The quiet that followed was not the politeness of a ballroom. It felt like a room remembering its manners. I slipped the letter back into the envelope with the certified pages and held both at my side. Olivia looked at Daniel and then at me and then at the floor. Howard unfolded his arms and placed his hands on the back of a chair as if to reassure himself that gravity still functioned. Patricia's lips pressed thin and then relaxed, then pressed again. Daniel tried a step toward the microphone. I did not move. He said he respected his parents and wanted what was best for everyone, and that this was not the time for legal parsing. He spoke to the room with the voice he uses in conference calls, where the outcome has been decided in a pre-meeting. He tried to throw a warm blanket over everything I had just said. David waited exactly 2 beats and then added that nothing here requires parsing. He said the structure is simple on purpose. He said if anyone believes otherwise, he will be available after dessert with the relevant pages. Maggie offered one more sentence because she understands how to place the last brick. She said, a family's future begins with boundaries named out loud. She said, tonight, those boundaries have been named. The air shifted. It is a thing you can feel in your chest when a crowd changes sides without moving an inch. The first row stopped smiling. The second row stopped clapping. The third row leaned forward to see better. At table 18, the man with the large watch studied the face of his drink with new interest. The woman with the confident perfume adjusted her shawl and looked at me as if I were a painting she had misread before and now understood. The MC cleared his throat and thanked me for those clarifications in a tone that sounded like a man stepping onto a dock that may or may not be attached to the shore. He announced that dessert would be presented and that the couple would soon share a dance. He offered this as a path back to safety. The room did not take it yet. I remembered the weight of a hard hat in winter and the way a site foreman can restore order by saying one true thing and then not explaining it. I turned to Daniel and met his eyes. I said I love you. I said that love does not hand you a future. Work does. Character does. The room is welcome to celebrate you. It is not permitted to erase me to make that easier. That is the last correction I intend to make tonight. A few guests applauded and then stopped themselves, surprised by their own hands. A woman near the front with a silver pin nodded once. A man in a tux that fit too tight whispered to his companion, and they both looked relieved. Olivia stood very still. Howard recalculated angles that had seemed certain an hour ago. Patricia spoke softly to a friend and did not blink as she did it. I held up the envelope one more time, not to wave it, only to let everyone see that paper and planning are not abstractions. They are doors you can close when needed. I said there will be time for private conversations and that I would welcome them. I said tonight can still be a celebration if everyone agrees to tell the truth even when it is not convenient. The quartet found a gentle measure and held it ready to step forward when asked. A server passed with a tray of small cakes lit by the reflections of crystal. The champagne tower stood untouched, a sculpture waiting for a hand to decide its fate. The MC looked to the hosts. The hosts looked at each other, and then at the crowd, and then at me. I gave the microphone back to the MC because power does not need to be gripped to be present. I placed the envelope inside my jacket where it had rested before, and felt the familiar edge settle against my ribs. Emily reached for my hand and squeezed once. Maggie's eyes met mine with a glint that said a line had held. David stepped back to where a lawyer belongs when his client has spoken. The room began to breathe again in long, careful pulls. Conversations restarted in smaller voices. A pair of guests near the aisle turned their chairs toward each other the way people do when they wish to be seen agreeing with truth. I stood still for a moment longer, then moved toward my table with Emily beside me, and the sound of the band like a tide that had decided to come back in. Daniel moved first. He said this was a mistake, that I had humiliated him, that the trust was a technicality, and that he was the rightful heir to the Hale estate. He told the room that legacy belonged to momentum, and that the next chapter had already been promised. I did not move. Olivia looked at Daniel, and then at me, and then at the envelope edge showing inside my jacket. She asked Daniel if he had kept this from her. She asked again when he started to explain. Her right hand went to the ring without ceremony. She slid it free and held it in her palm as if weighing its meaning. She let the ring fall into the champagne flute at her place. The sound was clean and final. She told him a secret like this was not a foundation. It was a trap door. Howard faced Daniel and told him that he had pulled the Morgans into a presentation that was never true. He said the evening had been built on his assurances, and that those assurances were smoke. He said no one drags his family into a circus and expects applause when the tent catches fire. Patricia did not speak. She gathered her shawl the way a woman gathers evening air around a decision. The front rows had been full of faces arranged for pleasure. Now they were arranged for judgment. A whisper moved through the room, not sneers, not cheers, a shared intake of breath that asked what happens to a claim when the ground slides away under it. Daniel turned on me now with both hands open. He said he had worked for this, that he had planned, that he had told everyone we were aligned, that I was making him look like a child in front of people he needed. He said I was punishing him for being modern, that I did not understand how this city works anymore. He tried to summon the room back to his side by reminding it of his earlier speech. The room did not move. I told him we could talk after the party in private. I told him we would not do it in front of people invited to celebrate. He said this was already public, and that I had made it so. He reached toward Olivia and stopped. She told him she did not know who he was if this was how he built a future. She said, "You do not build a life on borrowed certainty." Howard faced the guests and said they had acted in good faith based on representations that now appeared unsound. He said the evening should return to its intended purpose if possible. Emily leaned to me and said my name the way a daughter says it when she is asking a father to keep breathing. I nodded. A woman in the second row tried to clap to restart the celebration and stopped after 3 beats when no one joined. Daniel said he would not be painted as a liar. He said he had acted on the understanding that he would inherit that he had been told as much, that everyone knew the Hale name would pass to him. Olivia pushed her chair back. She told the MC she needed a moment and stepped away from the table. Daniel followed her 3 steps and stopped when she turned. She said, "Trust is not a thing you declare on a stage. It is what you do in rooms with no audience." She told him she would speak with him later if he wished. But not now, not here, not after tonight. Howard turned to Daniel and said words that were not designed to be private. He said, "You pulled my family into a story that needed only one match to catch, and you brought your own." He said, "You leaned on our name to bolster your version of the evening, and you did it on the thin ice of false assumption." He told Daniel he had embarrassed the people he claimed to honor. The crowd adjusted in place. Conversations began and stopped a syllable in. I could feel the shame traveling like a weather front, a pressure change that made ears ring and eyes blink. He tried again. He said I was rewriting history. He said the trust was a technical maneuver, that intention matters more than paper. He said everyone knew what had been meant for years. He asked who here did not understand that natural succession is the way of things. Intention does not hold a deed. Paper does. The MC suggested the couple take a brief pause and the guests enjoy dessert. Daniel looked at me. He looked at Emily. He looked for Olivia and did not find her. I could feel my own heart knock once and settle. I remembered a winter on a site in Worcester when we lost a wall to a surprise gust and the crew had to stand still while the air made its choice. You do not fight wind. You wait it out and rebuild what fell with better bracing. Daniel said this is not over and that he would fix it. He told the crowd there had been a misunderstanding and that statements tonight had been premature. He pulled at his cuffs and the fabric resisted. The words from the crowd were not cruel. They were blunt. The ballroom had gone from audience to jury. Howard spoke again, this time to the MC. He said the program should continue. He said the family would address matters privately. He did not look at Daniel when he said family. The MC nodded with relief and signaled the quartet. Music returned. Patricia did not return. The seat beside Olivia remained empty and eloquent. A server reached for the glass and withdrew her hand at a glance from a manager. "Leave it. Let the symbol do its work." Daniel stood in the center of his own party and had no one beside him. Friends who earlier had clapped his shoulders now adjusted their ties, checked their phones, turned to greet people at other tables. Emily did not move from my side. She said quietly that she felt sorry for him and angry at him at the same time. I told her both can live in a chest if you give them separate chairs. David faded a step farther back. Maggie exhaled a sound I could hear, though it barely existed. The mini stage at the front, so useful for speeches, now looked like a riser at a school assembly after the principal has left. The champagne tower still waited for the first pull. No one approached it. Daniel finally sat. He glanced at the exit and did not stand. He glanced at me and then away, the motion of a man who wants to ask a question he cannot form. The room no longer offered him a bridge. I pushed my chair in a fraction and let the band fill the space between beats. Around us, the hotel resumed its choreography staff, moving like a river around stones. The tide of talk rose again in small eddies. The night had not ended, but something else had. I put my palm flat on the table, felt the linen under it, and knew the next step would not be mine to take until the air settled. At the same time, I saw shoulders turn away from Daniel. She said I deserved to hear this a long time ago. It carried relief. Olivia did not return. I said I had good counsel and a wife who had taught me to keep the matches dry. Daniel pushed his chair back. The sound scraped across the carpet and died. He stood and looked around for a sentence that might shore up what was left. He said this was a mistake. He said he was the one who deserved the legacy. He said the paperwork did not reflect intention. The words fell in front of him and did not travel. He looked for Olivia again and found only the ring glinting in the flute where she had left it. He reached toward the glass and stopped a man unsure whether touching the symbol would make it vanish or nail it to the table. Howard spoke to him without moving his feet. He said something I did not catch and did not need to. Daniel's mouth tightened. He looked at me then, not to ask, but to measure. The room shifted its attention a fraction in my direction, as if ready to see whether a father would lift or let go. I did neither. I held his eyes and let the silence do its work. A man can tell the truth or he can explain it. He rarely gets to do both well in the same minute. Emily's hand found mine and squeezed. She whispered that I had done enough for tonight. I told her she was right. My chest felt quiet and strong the way it does when you finish bracing a wall and step back to see if it holds. Justice does not arrive by luck. It arrives when the forms were set days ago and the rebar tied before the pour. Preparation is not dramatic until the moment it matters. Then it is the only drama that counts. The band began a gentle standard that allowed conversation to find shallow water. Staff moved through with small plates that set a rhythm and a reminder that the night would continue whether or not anyone felt ready. A few guests clapped again in my direction, not all at once, not loud, a final sign that what needed to happen had happened. Others adjusted their chairs so their backs faced Daniel fully now. It was not cruelty. It was judgment rendered and recorded. Daniel leaned over the table with both hands planted, as if he could press the evening back into a shape he preferred. He looked at me for the second time, and for a heartbeat I saw the boy on a sidewalk with a scraped knee, waiting to be told this would sting, and then it would pass. I gave him nothing he could mistake as rescue, and nothing he could mistake as punishment. He straightened, glanced at the exit, and began to walk. He did not hurry. He did not wave. People made way for him the way they make way for weather. The doors opened. He disappeared into the brightest hallway light in the hotel. The hush that followed was bigger than silence. It was relief and regret and 100 private calculations. Emily let out a breath she had been holding since the first toast. She put both arms around me again and said I was worthy of this a long time ago. The words went down into a place I keep for things that will steady me later. I rested my chin on her hair and said we were going to be all right. She nodded against my shirt and held on a second more than she needed to. Maggie stepped close and touched my forearm. She said we would talk tomorrow and not tonight. David said he would send a brief note in the morning to document the exchange for anyone who keeps files the way some men keep trophies. He said I should enjoy the rest of the evening as much as the evening would allow. I told him I appreciated him, and he gave a small bow that looked like relief disguised as formality. A young server approached with 2 plates and steady hands. He set them down and whispered that his father used to hang drywall, and that he had grown up around men who did what they said. He said thank you and moved on before I could answer. The words stayed where he put them. I stood and looked at the ballroom. The chandeliers had softened. The music grazed the edges of talk without interrupting. People who had kept their distance earlier now found ways to pass near my table and nod. No one asked for a speech. No one offered a platitude. The dignity of small gestures carried the room. I reached for my glass and found my voice without needing volume. I said mostly to Emily, and perhaps to the two tables near us, that silence is not weakness. It is a choice a man makes when he knows what he holds. The sentence carried far enough. I saw faces lift and settle. I saw shoulders ease. In my mind, I saw Caroline at the sink with the letter drying by the dish rack, and the evening sun coming through the window in a way that made the dust look like gold. I heard her say, "Stand where you stand." I felt the envelope against my ribs like a tool that had done its work and could rest. I felt the floor under my shoes do what good floors do. It held. The MC announced that dancing was open and that the bar would stay friendly. Laughter came back in short lines. The champagne tower still waited, and no one reached for the first glass. A manager spoke with a staff captain, and they agreed without words to leave it untouched. Not every symbol needs to perform. Emily asked if I wanted to leave. I said we would give it a few more minutes and then step into the night. She nodded. Maggie told us she would meet us by the elevators when we were ready. David drifted toward the foyer to make a call. The room resumed being a room instead of a verdict. I stood beside my chair and let the music travel through me, not with joy, not with sorrow, but with the clean tiredness that follows work done right. The applause that had started in islands had quieted now into a steady tide of respect that did not need sound. The backs turned to Daniel had stayed turned. The future had retaken its shape, not perfect, not painless, but true enough to stand until morning. Emily's voice carried relief. Maggie told me to sleep and to let the night end without rehearsing it into something else. Emily rested her head on my shoulder and said we should go home soon. I told them I was not angry. I said the feeling inside me did not have heat. It had weight, the good kind, like a beam laid in the right place. I said justice does not arrive because a room cheers. It arrives because you set forms, you tie rebar, you pour and cure and wait the right number of days even when the schedule groans. David smiled at that and said that construction metaphors always beat hedge fund talk when the wind picks up. Maggie laughed and told him he was right, and then told me again to sleep. We started back toward the hotel. On the sidewalk, a delivery truck idled and the smell of coffee drifted from somewhere I could not see. I thought of mornings with Caroline before school, Rush's 2 mugs on the table, a list on a scrap of paper between us, her handwriting already making sense of the hours. I thought of Daniel at 10 drawing towers that were wider at the top than the bottom and insisting they would still stand. I thought of Emily learning to ride a bike along the river path and shouting back to make sure I was still there. They were all there in my mind, layered and steady. Inside the lobby, the night manager nodded to us with the precise courtesy of a man who has seen everything and will keep it. We waited for the elevator. A mirror opposite the doors caught the 4 of us in a single frame. A tired father with a straight back, a daughter whose eyes still held a spark. The world could not buy a sister with the posture of a sworn witness. A lawyer who believed that paper is a form of love when it protects what people meant to do. The doors opened and took us up. In the elevator, David laid out a short plan. He said he would email a certification to the hotel in the morning, in case anyone tried to spin the night into a different shape, not to escalate, only to document. He said we did not owe anyone more words. Maggie added one line that landed true. Let the echo carry itself. Emily touched my sleeve again. She asked if I wanted her to stay over. I said I would like that. We stepped out onto the parking level, where my truck waited it like an old friend who does not ask questions. The metal was cool under my hand. I turned to David and thanked him. He answered that his job had been easy tonight, because the truth had already been built. He walked to his car with a lift of the hand that said enough. Maggie hugged me and then Emily and told us to call if the night turned on us. It did not. The drive home took us along quiet streets where trees met over the road like neighbors leaning in to share a secret. Emily rolled down her window a crack and let the air circle the cab. She said she was proud of me. She said she was sad too. Both can be true, I told her. We pulled into the driveway, and the porch light glowed steady because she had made it so. Inside the house, the familiar creaks greeted us and then gave way to a comfortable stillness. Emily made tea and set the 2 mugs on the table where so many decisions have been weighed. She asked if I wanted to talk about Daniel. I told her not tonight. Tonight we would name only what helped. We sat a while and did nothing but breathe the same quiet. Before she went to the guest room, she pressed her hand to my shoulder and said, "We are still a family where truth lives." The sentence sat softly on the wood between us and stayed. Alone in the kitchen, I took the envelope from my jacket and set it beside the toaster in the exact spot where Caroline used to leave notes. I rested my palm on it the way a man might bless a tool before he puts it away. Then I put it back in the safe and closed the door with the practiced turn that tells your hands the world is still in order. I stood at the sink and looked through the pane into the dark yard. I could almost see Caroline in the reflection beside me. Not the sick years, not the pale days. The bright version who would squint at me and then smile and tell me I had done fine. I let that picture linger until it felt like she had walked past me into the hallway. When I speak to you now, I do it as a man who has lifted heavy things and set them where they belong. If you have ever been pushed to the back of the room, if you have ever been told to sit quietly while someone else wrote your story, hear me. Your worth does not live in another person's mouth. It is not a gift they can hand you or a trophy they can take. It is a line set deep long before any audience arrived. One day, the truth will speak for itself. When it does, it will not need to shout. It will need you to stand where you stand and let it be heard. I believe in karma, but not the cheap kind that expects lightning on a schedule. I believe in the long kind that rewards the boring work no one claps for. The habit of showing up. The discipline of building right even when no inspector is coming. The patience to hold a boundary without turning it into a wall. Families do not survive on money and speeches. They survive on respect earned by action, on love that dares to tell the truth, on the humility to correct a story before it hardens into a lie. Tonight did not end with fireworks. It ended with people walking into the night carrying new knowledge about themselves. Some will be better for it. Some will be smaller for a while. That is not my part to manage. My part was to prepare and then to speak plainly. Justice came because preparation had been done. It came because silence finally stepped aside for a minute to let a fact breathe. It came because love asked for clarity and got it. If you have ever been diminished, remember this line and carry it like a match kept dry. If you have ever wondered whether your voice matters, know that one steady sentence can reset a room that has forgotten how to listen. If you face a moment like mine, I hope you have a daughter who stands beside you, a sister who reminds you of the law, and of grace, and a friend who hands you the right paper at the right time. I am asking you to pass this on if it steadied you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they are not measured by a crowd's applause or by a relative's arrogance. If this story gave you a little courage or a little calm, like it, share it and subscribe so these words can find the next person standing in a quiet kitchen, wondering if they are enough. I am telling you they are. And that one day the truth will find its voice, and when it does, let yours be ready to say yes.